Welcome to episode number 10 of Golf and Politics. We've got a great show for you tonight. We have the former governor of the state of Kansas, Bill Graves. Bill Graves was also first elected Secretary of State in 1991, elected governor in 1994. He also served as the president of the American Trucking Association. He's a golf enthusiast, and we're glad to have him on the show. Governor, thanks for taking the time to join us tonight.
Matt, Cody, I'm happy to be with you. I'm not sure what I can add looking at the illustrious list of guests you had prior to me, but I'll do my best.
Well, Governor, one thing, we started this podcast, Cory and I, good friends since we were 13 and 14, but Cory has a Instagram page called Politics and Golf. And so I was real creative when I came up with the name for this podcast and called it Golf and Politics, so I wouldn't steal it completely from him. But I got to thinking, we both grew up together. We love golf. We're very passionate about it. Rob, who's not with us tonight, is the best player of the group. He might be the top of the list in the Golf Digest's best golfers in Washington, D.C. that comes out every year. But Cory and I are both four handicaps. We love the game of golf, and we wanted to have a safe place, if you will, to have people come on and give political perspectives and not yell and scream at each other about, who's right or who's wrong. Rob's not with us tonight. He's a liberal Democrat. I'm a Republican. Cory's a Republican. But ultimately, we just want to hear perspectives because we have people that listen, that play golf, that are not super involved in politics, and they learn something. And we also have some people that are in politics that are really passionate about golf, and they can learn something as well. And hopefully it's just a place where it's kind of toxic out there at times, and we can have a good time. So I'd love to just get into it with some questions I have for you. I wanted to start with a very interesting topic to me. You worked for President Bush on the campaign, right, in Kansas, when Bob Dole was running against him. What was that like to be opposing Kansas's favorite son and working on that campaign back in, I believe, 1988, correct?
Actually, that was 80. This was back when
1980.
Bush was Reagan was ultimately going to win, and Bush became his running mate. But it was interesting because I was so young, and Dole had such an army of supporters in the state. My dad was a big Dole guy. I mean, so I don't think Dole really probably even knew, or if he did, he didn't care because he had all the resources he needed in Kansas. It was elsewhere he was struggling. And Herbert Walker Bush, on the other hand, was a guy that everybody seemed to like, but was trying to find his footing as a political candidate. And so he was, and in Kansas, he was willing to take anybody that was, willing to, work for him. So it was a great way for me to just ease my way in. And it was a short stint, it lasted about 5 months. He then becomes the VP for Reagan. And of course, the Reagan people had quite a machine. And so the Bush people sort of got swept to the side quickly. And that was that. But I want to skip forward and just tell you, he never forgot that. And when I ran for governor in 94, he came out to the state and did an event for me. And boy, that is very meaningful when you're kind of a wannabe and you get a former president of the United States comes in and campaigns for you.
Can I ask a follow-up question about President Bush? We had Marty Russo on our show, former congressman from Illinois, Democrat, and he said that George H.W. Bush is the best president of his lifetime, which I thought was a very bold statement for a Democrat congressman to make. But I've been always impressed with biographies that I've read in that President Bush was so in tune with people around him. Personal notes, personal letters, personal phone calls just seemed to be a networking machine, but not in a sense of doing what's best for him, but he seemed to genuinely care about everybody around him. Is that the experience that you had as well?
Yeah. I thought he and Barbara were just wonderful people. They were good folks. and whatever political shortcomings he might have had, policy shortcomings he might have had, they were really fine people. And again, that's sort of what kicked off a relationship that I developed with W. When he was governor of Texas, we served together. And I always kind of chuckle. I was at an event with Barbara at one point, and she said something about how that at that point I was her second favorite governor. And then I ran into her about a year and a half later, and Jeb had been elected, and she said, "Now you're my third favorite governor." So they were just really nice people.
Fantastic. Well, can you tell us a little. You worked in 1980 for President Bush, and for George H.W. Bush's time, not president, but your family has a trucking company. I believe you worked in HR. Tell us a little bit about your career path leading into running for office yourself and getting elected Secretary of State.
Well, the family had a trucking company, fairly good size actually. Midwest, less than truckload operation, and in literally 1980, my dad and his brothers sold the company. They had an offer they couldn't refuse, and so I was looking for something to do. I'm 27 years old and just out of graduate school, and that's how I ended up, getting directed towards the Bush campaign. Doing that kind of work back in those days, if you wanted to see a voter registration list, you had to go to the county clerk or to the Secretary of State's office and, manually look at stuff. And so I spent a lot of time at the state capitol, and met the then Secretary of State, and we sort of hit it off. And after I got thrown overboard by the Bush, the Reagan people in the summer of '80, he contacted me and said, "Hey, I've got a spot in the office, and I think you ought to come over and talk to me about it." So I did, and was hired in August of '80. I started my first job, and I always like to say the office was in the state capitol, which was a big deal when you're 27 years old and your first job. And from the day I walked in the Capitol in August of 1980 until I walked out of the Capitol on January of 2003, every job I had was in the state Capitol building. So I got pretty well acquainted with the Capitol.
Well, tell us, so you get elected in 91, you're Secretary of State, and then you ran for governor. And went back and watched, I think it was your introductory ad running for governor about load 'em high and tight. And it was a fantastic spot. But just tell us a little about what drove you to run for governor, and what was that first campaign like in '94?
Well, one correction, my boss, the Secretary of State, he ran for governor in '86. So my first run at elective office was in 1986, and I was elected Secretary of State. Ran for re-election in 1990, and then I loved public service, but I just didn't want to make it my whole life. I mean, I wanted to be a kind of an old school public servant. You do your work, and then you move on, you do something else. And so after 2 terms of Secretary of State, I just was ready. You're either going to move up or you're going to move out. And so ran in a I thought a pretty competitive primary, was successful, had a 6-term Democratic congressional opponent in the general election, Jim Slattery, who's a good guy. And Kansas is a pretty tough state for the Democrats most of the time, and so I won, and ran for re-election in '98, and then was term limited out. And so after 22 years, I called it a career and moved on to Washington back to the roots, the family, the trucking business, and got involved in the American Trucking Association. So it was a great journey, and I'm glad I did it. I loved it while I was there. I'm probably glad I did it when I was young and didn't know what I know now, because it's a much more difficult, and I think rough and tumble business than it was back in in the 80s and 90s.
Governor, it's Cory. I have a question for you. Did you ever want to or contemplate running for U.S. Senate after finishing up as governor or during when you're governor? We see that now where folks will step down, somebody else gets slotted in, and then next thing you know, they're getting appointed to fill a seat or for run for a Senate spot. And we know how many former governors end up in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate.
Probably not, for a couple of reasons. First of all, again, I thought more of myself as a I thought I was going to be a businessman. I thought I was going to run a family trucking company, and so I never probably really the legislative thing never really interested me like it does some. And Kansas was so well represented. I mean, over the years, you had Bob Dole and Nancy Kassebaum, and then you had Pat Roberts come over from the House. Um, one of my most challenging and probably one of the mistakes I made was when Dole resigned in his run for the presidency. I had to pick a successor. And I did what a lot of people do. I stayed loyal to my lieutenant governor who wanted the slot. Her name was Sheila Fromm, and she took Dole's Senate seat. And Sam Brownback, who, I don't know if you guys know Sam, but Sam came to me and said, I want to be in the U.S. Senate, and if you don't appoint me, I'm going to run. And he did, and he beat Sheila, and went on to serve for quite a while. But I was good with 22 years in the executive branch, and I didn't think I needed to meddle in legislative affairs.
I'd like to hear a little more about '96 with when Dole retired to run for president and in that appointment. But I also would like to come back. You said something interesting to me. You said you're glad you were in office and ran for office in the 80s and 90s when it was less rough and tumble. I have found, doing this for a living, 90% of the races that I work on are Republican primaries or Republican primary runoffs or inter-party battles. And I find them to be particularly nasty and cutthroat. What do you think has changed? I mean, what was different in the primaries that you ran in the 80s and 90s versus the Republican and frankly the Democratic primaries that we see today that are so divisive?
Well, I say that, and it probably when I I am an old school moderate Republican. I'm in those days your focus was simply on the meat and potatoes issues. You were taking care of the economy. You were taking care of infrastructure, schools, and while we were starting to see the emergence of a lot of the social issues, they weren't yet dominating, and they didn't, they were contentious, but I don't think it was where we've gotten to today. But there was a wing of the Republican Party in my state that wasn't happy with my positions on a lot of the social issues. And so the ironic thing was the state party chairman, a former member of the state legislature, David Miller, he actually resigned his chairmanship as chairman of the state party, and he ran against me in the 1998 primary. So I had my state party chairman head to head with the sitting governor, and it was uncomfortable. There was a level of tension, you might say, that I don't think otherwise would have been there. I came out on top, but I'm not sure, again, today, if you put me up against a hard right conservative, my positions would probably not sell very well to most of the voting Republicans, and I'm okay with that. I get it. Times change, and that's why we move out and other people move in.
Sure.
It's your least sticking to your principles.
Well, I think at the time, there's um, as times change, the lay of the political land and the policy, policy changes, and you've I did the best I could while I was there, and I was happy. Like I say, term limits are a wonderful thing. I left office with the same wife I started with. I was never indicted, and I got a job, so I was happy to leave. And I I wish there were more in public service who could figure out maybe that it's time to go when they insist on staying longer than they should.
And I know that being the top state executive is a little different than like being in Congress, because some folks in here in Washington feel like where things really have gotten tore apart, besides social media, has been with redistricting and that process at the state level, but also some Politico, I believe, ran an article a few years back. It pointed to what happened in Indiana's 8th district, the bloody 8th, in that race where I believe they did not seat, where the Democrats would not seat the Republican who won. And it eventually, I believe that person did get seated, but a lot of people pointed to that as kind of ripping the Band-Aid off and things kind of going sour afterwards.
Yeah, well, because I served as the Secretary of State, um, I have the perspective as someone who's been involved in counting votes, overseeing elections. After I left office, I actually went and worked as a poll worker uh, here in Fairfax County, Virginia, um, in the 2020 presidential race, which was an eye opener. Was fascinating experience. I spent 2 weeks at an advanced voting place, and I also, of course, went through redistricting issues in my state at the end of 1999. I guess we did it every 10 years. So it's I, it's so hard sometimes to separate just the sheer politics from and hang on to good public policy at the same time. They often, like oil and water, they just won't mix. And some people have an inclination towards a heavier dose of political outcomes, and some people spend more time worried about good policy outcomes. And that's why we see lots of contentious debates. And in a way, it's what makes the system great.
So you were definitely you self-identified as a moderate, right? But you were known for being bipartisan, correct? I mean, and is it true you had some Democrats in your cabinet? I've seen that you've endorsed twice a Democrat for governor in Kansas. That's just so rare today to see bipartisanship. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we moved away from people looking at the public good versus holding on to party is so critically important, and being so afraid to speak out if they feel that somebody from the opposite party has a good idea?
Well, I mean, let's start at the beginning. I worked across the aisle because I really had to. A lot of the things I was trying to get done again were uh, they were pretty reasonable, pragmatic. I didn't play a very heavy political hand, and therefore there were certain votes in my own party that I was, not going to be able to count on. And no hard feelings. That's just, we ought to agree to disagree and not be disagreeable about it. And that's how I always tried to do my job. So I had some good relationships with some Democrats in the legislature. They helped me. Um, you know, I had to give a little to get them on board, but not so much that I lost the bulk of my Republican support. And in a way, if you think about it, that's kind of where most people are. I mean, I think today we identify more far right and far left, but a lot of people don't get up in the morning worried about, what did the legislature do yesterday to me, or what are they going to do today? I mean, they want you to take care of their business, and if you do, they'll take care of you at election time. You know, I think where we are today has a lot to do with, and it's hard to put my finger on it, but we have such a political industry that exists. Whether it's pollsters or consultants or the everybody is engaged in a way where winning is all important. It's all about winning, and if you cross certain people, I mean, let's face it, the concern people have about crossing President Trump. You cross him, and you end up giving up your seat, or it's taken away from you. Again, not anything that I particularly enjoy seeing, but it is a reality of just where things are today. So if you want to play in the game, it's hard ball, and that's how it works.
But I fully admit that I'm part of the problem. People like me, everything that my business is all about, people hire me to win elections, and so that's what I have to do. And I find myself constantly, I seem to recruit and gravitate more towards the people you're talking about that maybe aren't waking up every morning thinking about politics, but have policy ideas that they want to get across. And I really enjoy working with those kind of clients. And so being able to, for me, having to explain to them the political realities of, let's say we're in Oklahoma or West Virginia, there's two states I do a lot of work in, where Donald Trump will win Republican primary voters over at an 85% clip. If you're a candidate and you might disagree with Donald Trump on something, I teach my candidates to keep their mouth shut. It's not their place to criticize President Trump if you want to win a Republican primary in those states. And so I guess what I'm getting at too is it's an interesting thing. In Oklahoma, we just had our state legislative primary elections, June 18th. The voter turnout statewide was less than 19% amongst Republicans. Okay. In the first congressional district where I live here in Tulsa, it was 16%. The only district that had decent, like when you say decent turnout, was Tom Cole's district. Tom Cole was challenged by some multi-millionaire from Texas that came to Oklahoma to run for Congress, and there was 26% turnout in Tom Cole's district. But that was the highest of any of the 5 congressional districts in our state. And I took a lot of flack from some people on the far right because I went on the 6 o'clock news and did an interview, and I said, well, it's the far right that's determining these elections because they're the ones that show up. We're talking about 19, 20, 25% of the voters. And I just have to believe that there's a lot of people that aren't super partisan, and so they don't pay that close of attention to the partisan bickering that goes on within a Republican primary. And what they don't realize as a voter is that by them not showing up to vote in our state primary on June 18th, they have no say in the process because there is only 10% of the districts in the state of Oklahoma where a general election even matters. Yeah. And I think that's a wild thing to kind of wrap your head around, is that such a few number of people in a state like Oklahoma, a state like West Virginia, such a few number of people decide who runs that state. And I don't know that it was always that way. I guess I'm not a historian, so I don't know that, but boy, I would give anything to go back to the days where I'm trying to win over swing Democrats to vote for a Republican for office.
Matt, I would, and Governor, I would argue that people back, Matt, when you and I grew up, or like even well before then, people took pride in going to the polls. Everybody wanted to go to the polls and vote. Voter turnout was, I would assume, again, I'm not a historian either, even though I was a history major, that folks got out to vote more than what they did now. Now it's just kind of is it raining out, or I'm busy right now, I got to get to work. It just seemed like people, like watching my grandparents and my parents, they took pride in going to the polls when they had a chance to vote in a primary. Or
I could be mistaken, but I could swear I read an article just the other day about turnout for the presidential elections, and I want to say that the number was 67%. Does that sound at all right to you guys?
I know it was definitely higher in 2020 than it was in 2016. It was significantly higher.
Yeah, and
But it's still not a big number of Americans that are voting.
no, but it's close to, 7 out of 10 uh, are still feel that way, Corey, about a national election. But yeah, there's I have to confess, I left office 21 years ago. Um, and I've gotten to the point that all of this noise, this political noise, is not very interesting to me anymore. The first thing I do in the morning is grab the sports page and, look at golf scores and so um, people expect public officials to, whoever they are, to do their job. And I think a lot of people just feel like that. I don't know that it's that they don't. It's not this thing about they don't think their votes count. I think they know their votes count, um, but it's just that whoever's elected, I don't know that they see that it makes a big difference in the overall way things turn out day in and day out. And
Well,
we
it's a great
we know
great
examples of
transition.
that. We know examples of that where that's definitely not true, but for the most part, they figure they're going to get together. They're going to pass budgets. They're going to, pass policies that'll, keep us safe. They're going to, you know, keep schools that we can send our kids to. And that's what I worry about.
Well, Governor, it's a good transition point because I do this for a living, and the first thing I check out in the morning is also the golf scores and the golf Twitter verse. I care way more about what people are saying about professional golf on Twitter than I do politics at times. I read a lot of the political stuff because I have to for my job. But yeah, I am with you. A lot of it just becomes big time noise. I think there's people that are far right Republicans, and that's their team. It's almost the same as somebody that's a Kansas Jayhawks fan checking out how the basketball team's doing. They're checking out Newsmax and Fox News to see how the far right candidates are doing, what they're saying, and how they're owning the Democrats. And so I think it's a good transition point for us to maybe start talking about something a little more enjoyable for all of us, which is golf. It's a great place where we get to and maybe quit thinking about politics and spend 4 hours, 5 hours with people that you love. And tell us a little bit, what got you into the game of golf? I know you were an athlete in college. Lewis Jackson works for me. I know you're friends with his father, and you grew up playing sports. But tell us what got you into the game of golf.
Well, I played a little bit when I was really young. And by that, I mean, when I was like, 10, 12, 15 years old. And then I went to a very small college, and I played baseball with Lewis's dad, uh, and played football as well. Of course, small colleges in those days, you could play as many sports as you could, you wanted to. Um, and I think I kind of got away from golf, or I know I got away from golf because I was, playing those team sports. And then for some reason I got into running, and so I ran a lot for a lot of years, enough to beat up my knees and my hips and everything else. And it wasn't until I really finished my political career that I started playing again pretty seriously. I did play some when I was in office. Buddies and I would sneak away and go someplace and just take a 4-day deal and just do a guy's golf trip, and that was very enjoyable. I have fond memories of that. But it was when I came back to Washington and joined RTJ, where you guys will be. You can't belong out there and not really enjoy golf because it's such a beautiful, spectacular place. And I'm excited to show it off to everybody here in September when the Solheim Cup is there.
Mhm.
It's and you guys are going to enjoy yourselves. I assume that's a member guest you're going to.
It is an event our co-host puts on with all of his clients and his partners at his firm. There's usually about 40 to 50 of us. It's lunch, breakfast, the whole dinner, golf, a couple of days, kind of stay overnight.
Cool. Yeah. Well, it's a great deal. But no, I just started playing more. But unfortunately, I'm not a young man anymore, and I've had a knee replaced, and I've had a couple of shoulder surgeries, and that's kind of slowed me down. But I'm trying to hang in there and get going again. And so I'm I'm nowhere
Well,
I'm nowhere near where you guys are. I can tell you that. My handicap, the best I ever was about a 15. So uh, that's as good as
you
I've
know,
been.
I'm checking out the golf scores this morning from the John Deere Classic, and I had a really good round yesterday. I pretty much shot even, and I'm looking at my handicap and where I'm at and where my potential is, and then I'm looking at the scores that they're shooting at Deer Run, and yeah, they call it this easy golf course. It's not an easy golf course. It's like a 75 course rating, a 135 slope rating. I mean, it's not easy, and they're shooting 28 under was the winning score, and I'm thinking if he gave me a stroke a hole for 4 days, he would still beat me by a significant margin, most likely. I mean, these guys they're just flat out amazing, and the women are too. And I think the Solheim Cup at RTJ is going to be special. I wish I could come out for that, but I have a son that's going to be a senior this year playing high school football, and he doesn't like he likes golf to the point of once a month, twice a month he'll go out and play with dad because he wants to maybe spend some time with me, but he's obsessed with football, and I'm all about that, and I don't want to miss too many Friday night lights this in his senior year.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, it's again the course is in great shape. Like I said, I was out there about a week ago, and they've opened it up. The views of the lake are spectacular now, and they've lengthened the number of the holes. They're playing even harder than they were. Um, they number one. It used to be if you were long and you sort of rolled off the back, it would just get caught up in some grass and stop. Well, they've shaved the back of number one now, so it slopes away. And if you go over the green, you're going to be it's like Pinehurst. You're going to be about 40 yards down the slope in a tight lie, trying to come back up the hill, and it's wasn't fun. I personally experienced it last week.
Governor, in the state of Kansas, did you have a favorite course? Was it like Prairie Dunes or Flint Hills National? I haven't played either one, in full disclosure, but I have friends at both courses, so I know those are probably your two best in the state.
Yeah, Prairie Dunes is a special place. I mean, it's very unique the way it's laid out, and didn't play there a lot, but played enough to experience how tough it is. And some of the Kansas City courses, the old school country clubs in Kansas City are really nice places to enjoy a round of golf. And but I'm from Salina. There's a nice club in Salina. They just hosted the Women's Senior Open last year, I think. And so they had all the big names. Annika Sorenstam was in Salina, Kansas, playing golf. And they were very proud to have that tournament out there.
Well, that is a funny small world because where Matt and I are going to be playing on Sunday in Pittsburgh, the club that I belong to, that Rob also belongs to, is Fox Chapel Golf Club, and we're hosting a U.S. Senior Women's Open in 3 weeks.
Really?
So yeah, so that's fun. That's a funny coincidence.
They would have been in Salina, Kansas last year.
Amazing. Well, Governor, I want to respect your time, and how we like to close these episodes is we want to just start asking you some quick questions, call it the shotgun nine, just like going out and playing a quick 9 holes at the end of the day. Just ask you some short questions, and just some fun questions, and see what your short answers are. I'll go ahead and start it. What's the best legislative deal you ever worked out on the golf course, or did you ever work out a big legislative deal, either as a lobbyist for the Trucking Association or as governor? Was there ever a deal struck on the golf course that you can talk about?
The most memorable moment I have that involves politics and public service on the golf course was getting a phone call from uh, President Bush W. It was actually Andy Card was calling on behalf of the president, and they were looking for someone who wanted to kind of ride herd over recovery from Hurricane Katrina. And they thought a former governor would be a perfect person to do a job like that. Someone who had a background in logistics and trucking, and it took all my what's the word, tact. I had to be very delicate in politely saying I'm not interested, and I'm glad I did.
That's great.
Governor, what was your coolest moment, if you will? Because you were tied in with NASCAR or one of the speedways previously. What would you say your highlight there would have been?
Uh, uh, Grand Marshal at the Daytona 500. Gentlemen, start your engines.
Wow.
Was that in '98 when Earnhardt won?
Yes, yeah, and Dale Earnhardt won that year.
Oh wow! Did you have a chance to meet him?
Yes, I did, and that was probably number one. Number two was the inaugural race in Kansas City, and I did the command there along with the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas. But then I got to jump in the pace car, and the back seat was empty, and they said, "Is there anybody you want to take with us?" And I looked around, and the national anthem for that race was Brooks and Dunn. And I said, "Hey, you guys want to jump in?" And they said, "Sure." So Brooks and Dunn jumped in the back seat, and we did the pace car lap at the inaugural race, and Jeff Gordon came up and bumped us in the butt, which was pretty exciting.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, and can you just you were on the board? How long were you on the board of NASCAR? And that was that right after you were governor that you served?
Yeah, from 03 to about 19 is when they finally bought the public company back, folded International Speedway back into the France family NASCAR holdings.
Well, let's divert from the Shotgun 9 real quick because I think this deserves a little more time. How did you get onto the NASCAR board? What's your connection to it?
Well, uh, in 1997, I lose track of time exactly, but a couple of guys in Kansas City, attorneys, had been contacted by the France family, the NASCAR people, about interest in bringing a track somewhere into the Midwest. And I got a call and basically said, "Hey, there's people that are looking at Kansas City, Missouri. They're looking at St. Louis. They're just kind of trying to figure out where they might want to be. And would you be interested in talking to them?" And of course, having a trucking background, stuff that rolls. I mean, motors, tires. We had been racing fans all my life. I went to the Indianapolis 500 every year for, I don't know, 15 or 20 years. And but anyway, I said sure. So they actually came, and we met very secretively. They didn't want people to know they were there, but we sat down, and in effect, I just said, "You guys just need to tell me what you need. What do we got to do? What kind of infrastructure improvement do you need? What sort of economic incentive package do you need?" And it wasn't the kind of reception they received most places, because most people had a notion that racing was just loud noise and people drinking too much beer and causing a ruckus. And I think they just appreciated the welcoming, so they ended up agreeing to build the track in Kansas City, Kansas. And we had quite a good, productive partnership. So the minute I left office, Bill France called me and said, we lack sort of political awareness. We don't have anybody on our board that really understands, and we're trying to expand, and we need to be able to reach out to people in a way that gets, opens doors for us. And would you want to be on the board? So I said, sure, that'd be great. So
Amazing.
it was fabulous.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Governor, when I was on the Hill, one of the bosses congressman I worked for out there, we were involved in, it was the National Guard Youth Foundation to help out troubled teens at some of the National Guard sites throughout the various states. But I believe NASCAR was involved to some degree with it, or at least Rick Hendricks was, and we would have events every year, and Rick would show up, and he would bring Dale Earnhardt Jr. and John Barnes from Panther Racing would come along and bring some folks as well. So that was really cool, because the kids from these troubled teenagers would absolutely adore it and love it when the NASCAR and IndyCar folks would come.
Yeah. Well, and then for me, it also worked out great because, again, I said trucking and racing. Roger Penske became a very good friend. Penske Leasing is one of the largest, enterprises involved in trucks, logistical movement in the country, and he happens to be sort of the one of the kings of racing, both NASCAR and open wheel, and so I spent a lot of time with Roger, and you ask about memorable things. I was at the 500 one year, and the pre-race meeting was so packed, all the drivers and crew chiefs and media. There was literally everybody was standing. There was no place to sit, and Roger saw me over standing by the wall, holding up the wall, and he motioned to me and come over here. And so I walked over and actually sat with Roger and Joey Logano in the bullpen. And I thought, boy, they're going to spot me and somebody's going to throw me out of here because I'm not supposed to be here. But Roger said it was okay, so that was good enough for me.
Have you played the Brickyard Golf Course?
I have not. I've spent some, as I said, time at the Brickyard and toured extensively. The museum is incredible, and the 4 levels of garage below underground where they keep all the stuff they don't have room to display is phenomenal. But missed out on enjoying the golf course.
It's incredible in the month of May when you're playing there, and those 5 holes inside the track, and you're listening to the cars run their practice rounds there, just to hear it just whip around the track, and you're trying to golf takes so much concentration. You're trying to hit these shots, and you're listening to these cars. So it's really, really neat.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Well, Governor, the next question, I'm going to give you 2 options on how to answer it. Either the best foursome you've ever played in, or if you could pick a dream foursome, who would it be? If you could pick the best foursome, celebrity, politician, professional golfer, who would that be, or who's the best foursome you ever played with?
I had an interesting team of guys that did national sales for me when I ran the American Trucking Association. These were the guys whose job it was to go to state association meetings, go out and visit fleets, and try to talk them into joining and being part of our National Trade Association. And Dave Brody, an Alabama guy, was a linebacker at Auburn in the late 60s. Danny Neal, another Alabama guy, played for Bear Bryant at Alabama. And John McKinnon was a golfer from Clemson who played, in some of the secondary tours back in the day, the Nike Tour, I think it was called. I'm not even sure. But I had these guys working for me, and just every now and then we would be able to get together and play a round of golf. And, two former college linebackers. These were big, these guys could really hit the ball. And John, who had, still carried a card, he was quite good. Anyway, John was good friends with the pro out at TPC Scottsdale. And he got us on about a week before the tournament. at TPC Scottsdale. So all that infrastructure, and now the 16 when they walk through the tunnel into the kind of amphitheater now set up on the waste management tournament.
Yeah.
TPC Scottsdale, that was all there, all the infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
That was a very memorable round of golf. And I also remember that every time I hit my ball in the rough, I could not find it because it was about 8 inches deep.
That are still on your list where you want to play?
Well, I've my lousy game. I've been at places where I should never have been, but you're invited and you're allowed to go because you're a governor or a former governor. I have a friend who's a member at Cypress Point. That's a special place to go play golf. I had a friend that was a member at Oakmont. That's one of the hardest courses I've ever been on in my life, and my game's not good enough for Oakmont. I'm kind of like my political skills. I understand what is doable and what's not doable, and you ought not do what's not doable. So no, I'm satisfied with RTJ. Will be just fine for me, and if I can segue into the twilight years and still be able to get out and hit a ball occasionally, that's going to be good for me.
Or are you still trying to get on Oakland on Saturday?
I will knock on wood. My plan is for me to tee off at 11 a.m. on Saturday at Oakmont. So,
Oh my!
Now I'll enjoy my thorough ass whooping on Saturday.
Well, Governor, last question. It's a two-part question, and one of these questions we've asked to every single guest. But I feel that since our show is golf and politics, we now have to ask two different questions. The first is not who do you want to be the president in 2025, but who do you believe will be the president in 2025? Who do you believe will win the election? And second part of that question, who would win in a golf match, Trump or Biden, since that's become a top issue to debate on the national level now?
Well, I'll answer the second one first, and that is, of course, Trump would win in a golf match. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And now I'll irritate every viewer because I am one of those individuals who is so unhappy that these are going to be our two choices. I like to see one of those situations where you are you really struggle with what the two candidates bring, and I'm talking positively to the outcome of an election. And I think President Biden is too old, very candidly. I'm not surprising anybody with that. And I struggle with some of the personal decisions that President Trump has made. If he could simply surround himself with a team of good people and then let them get on with doing their jobs. But he does seem to be the type of person that wants to be the center of attention at all times. And I think that is detrimental to his, success. Right now, I think Trump's going to win this election. I think, Biden's in a deep hole that I'm not sure he'll be able to dig his way out of, and he's got members of his own party turning on him, asking him to step down. All the headlines, for a while there, it was all about the problems that President Trump was facing. I'm not hearing any of that now. Everything seems to be about the trouble facing Joe Biden, and every day that goes by where President Trump's not faced with answering, sort of some of the questions about his issues, I think is a benefit to him. So, but I think at the end of the day, everybody says, this is, the lesser of two evils. And as someone said, but that means that, either way, you're going to get evil. And I don't mean evil in that kind of bad sense, but I just think it's unfortunate that our nation doesn't have better choices than we are going to have.
Well, I respect you coming on our podcast and appreciate you coming on our podcast. And I loved hearing your perspective on politics, your time in office. And I feel I have the need to really date stamp this episode, Monday, July 8th, because when we release this, I mean, who knows if President Biden is still the Democrat nominee? I mean, I think this next 6 weeks could be pretty wild. So we'll have to wait and see how this all shakes out. And we have to not forget that President Trump still faces sentencing at some point this year. So it's gonna be quite interesting. But Governor, we really appreciate your time. And I know we had some technical difficulties getting started here today. Thank you for being patient with us. We really enjoyed this. And I sure hope to meet you someday, maybe when we're out at RTJ in the fall. It'd be awesome to be able to connect with you and meet you face to face.
You guys have a fabulous time out there. I know you will.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all of our listeners. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Golf and Politics, and on X at Golf Politics Pod. We really appreciate everyone who's been downloading the episodes and listening. And our goal is just to keep giving you great content and have a good time. So, Governor, thanks again. Cory, thanks again. And thanks to our listeners.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Take care.
All right.